Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Talk Gnosis. We got a special episode tonight, one that we really enjoy doing, and that the audience really seems as well. We have audience questions. We've got a lot of questions, lots of good ones, and if we don't get to your question tonight, we're going to make this a regular thing. A few items before we dive into it. One is a lot of this is going to be my personal opinions and personal interpretations, and I'm absolutely not speaking on behalf of my particular faith community, the Apostolic Johannite Church. So anything I say, please take it with a grain of salt. And fortunately, I'm really lucky to be joined with Bishop Lainey Peterson tonight.
Hey, yeah.
Uh, yeah, which is great because you get to hear some. You put two Gnostics in a room, and you're going to get three or four different opinions. So we get
Five,
to
6, 7.
7, 8, yeah. So you're gonna be able to hear some differences and not just be treated to my rambling. If you're a patron of Talk Gnosis, and if you are, thank you so much. And if you're not, if you can spare a buck, please sign up because you get this show early and you can watch it live. And patrons can also chat to us. In the live chat function on YouTube. Patrons, if you're watching this now, you can actually ask questions, and the voice of our secret chief, the unknown superior, our producer Father Tony, will relay those questions to us. The other thing, patrons, that you can do is if you have a particular insight or something amazing to say, and Father Tony spots it, perhaps you'll be able to relay that to us and we can get yet another perspective. And again, if we don't get to your question, sorry, we only have so many hours in the day, but if it's a good question and you're a patron and you put it in the chat, then we will get to that in the future. So I guess I'll start with the first question, which is there's no Gnostic churches or groups close to me. What are some Gnostic spiritual practices I can do, and how can I get guidance with them? And that's I put that together from two similar questions from Thundersaurus 5 and Rising Phoenix. So, the Bishop Lady, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, I would actually say, first of all, that I think this is true for most people. To have a Gnostic group or community near you is probably more the exception than the rule. So I think that one thing that you might do is there are various online Gnostic groups, forums, communities, and talking to other people who are in the same boat might give you some ideas. And in fact, they might be better qualified than somebody who is part of a local Gnostic community or Gnostic clergy, for the simple reason that you're going to be working with people, talking to people who have actually faced your dilemma and have figured out how to work with it.
Mm.
So that's one thing I would probably suggest. The second is, yeah, I think definitely practices and rituals are a very good way of trying to maintain your practice, to develop yourself. And there are different ways of doing that. Our own Father Tony has written a book of Gnostic practice from the position of his church, the Apostolic Johannite Church. But there are other Gnostic groups out there that have put out information, have put out lectionaries. I believe the Ecclesia Gnostica has its own lectionary and it's free. It's on their website, and you can certainly read those passages on a regular basis. One of my favorite practices that anybody can do from home is the Liturgy of the Hours.
Mm.
Which is timed prayer throughout the day. June Singer has a wonderful Gnostic book of hours. And I think that it's absolutely lovely. But you can also look at other Gnostic or Christian hours, and see what you like among them, and even eventually put something together for yourself. Phyllis Tickle put out the Divine Hours series, which is a whole series of ecumenical Christian devotions, but hours. And it's really quite excellent. A lot of diversity, a lot of scriptures, but that it might be a good practice to start with. And then if you want over time, you can substitute Gnostic scriptures or readings as well, and see how you like that. So, I guess to sum it up, I would say, first of all, find people who are in the same boat, find out what they do. And then the other thing that you can also do is start a practice that is suitable for home. And I think the hours is a really good practice for anybody who does not have a community, because it's something that you can do very easily at home or on your own time.
Yeah, I don't got much more to say. That's amazing advice right there. I'll put a few asterisks on the name of Father Tony's book. Of course, is Sanctuary of the Sacred Flame. You can buy it on Amazon, but he's generously given it away for free as an ebook as well. So I will link it in the show notes. I do the hours. It's a wonderful practice. The June Singer book is fantastic. I don't always want to be advertising the Joanites, but we now have our version of the hours online. And the last thing I'll say as well, if there's some groups that are close to you that you're comfortable studying and practicing with that perhaps aren't necessarily Gnostic, but for instance, I know that we have some people who consider themselves Gnostics who go to Anglican churches.
Hmm.
Sorry, Episcopalians for Episcopalian churches for you Americans, particularly liberal ones where they can receive the sacraments, have some community, and where they're not really grilled about their beliefs. The other thing I can recommend, I'm a big meditation guy. Meditation is a big part of my spiritual practice, and just learning simple sitting meditation, going in a secular way, which is now quite easy in even small communities. You know, just like how yoga's been sort of taken out of its Hindu context, and now doesn't matter what you believe, you can go to a yoga class. There's lots of opportunities to sort of study meditation, what they call mindfulness, and it's usually in a secular context. But if you get good at that practice, I feel like it's a fantastic spiritual discipline for Gnostics and for anybody on the mystical path. So those are my asterisks on that. Um, I'll move on to the next question. We've got two from Or Cloud, so thank you, Or Cloud. Two great questions. We'll start with their first question, which is the Gnostic community has been growing a lot in just the past few years. Yay! And we have many new people interested in learning about Gnosticism. Are there any particular tips or insights you would like to share with newcomers to the Gnostic faith? So, Bishop Laney, take it away.
Yeah, I would okay. First of all, I would encourage a convert to any faith or spiritual practice or discipline to exercise caution.
Mm,
And I don't mean to be a Debbie Downer with this, but the reality is that there are a lot of groups out there that claim to be esoteric or Gnostic or spiritual or occultic that can be bad news. And I advise anybody to just be cautious when you begin on this path, because there are pitfalls, and some of those pitfalls have been created very deliberately by people who want to exploit the people who are new. And so I would say, be very cautious. Ask around. I mean, are there metaphysical or occult bookstores in your area? They may be able to offer some tips and ideas. Are there pan occult or pan pagan communities in your area where they have just general parties or festivals or meetings? Again, you can ask around and see what kind of reputation that group or organization that you're interested in has. Attend to some events. Be careful about getting too deeply entrenched. Also, always clarify things about regarding money,
mhm.
because I think that can be a pitfall in many cases when you have a group that wants to exploit others. Things like that. Again, this sounds very negative, but it is a fact of life.
Yeah.
Having been in the esoteric community for a very long time, the fact of life is that there are groups and churches and organizations out there that you need to be careful about. So I would advise being careful, if particularly if you're new and you don't have a lot of information about the organization. But the other thing is, again, also when you're being careful, it gives you the opportunity to try out different things. And you may live in a metropolitan area where that is an absolute, that's a possibility, that there are several different groups in in one area. By all means, check them out. Get to know the people there, and see if there's something that you feel comfortable committing to. And I do think that there is something to be said to committing yourself to a church, for the simple reason that you can really grow in relationships, and there's that kind of spiritual accountability that can come into play and can really develop for you. But I think that allow the process to go slowly. And a lot of people, I hear a lot of people will say, "Oh, I've come home. I've come home. I found this and I've come home and I'm home." And then 6 months later, they're looking for a new home. It's just a matter of using caution, checking things out, asking questions, getting to know the people. And once you have information and experience, then you can start making some decisions.
Yeah. Uh, I just from personal experience, I remember when I first started looking, I was googling around and I saw these posters for a group that I won't name because we try to be positive. That was
And
advertising,
I'm not,
these.
but yeah.
No, I too am a Debbie Downer. But it was advertising these Gnostic activities. I'm like, oh wow, there's still Gnostics around, and they're
Yeah.
doing these what seem to be great seminars and such. And then fortunately, I did. I took my time. I did some research. I did some googling, and I'm like, this group seems not very good, a little
Yeah.
sketchy.
I think
And
I know what you're talking about too. So
yeah,
yeah, but yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and all jokes aside, the people, we're all bivocational, right? So
Yeah.
we have secular lives. So I have friends and family. They ask me, what is this Gnosticism stuff? And I was googling it and I found all this stuff about UFOs, and I'm always cautioning people, be just heading to Google can be dangerous. Because anybody can start a website, and as Orcloud mentioned in their question, Gnosticism is starting to get popular again, right? So people are going to hang their bag using that word. So and even becoming involved with the AJC, yeah, I dipped my toe in. It took me a couple years, and I was a little cautious, and I went to the conclave to check these people out, and I am really glad that I took the time.
Yeah.
So, moving on to Orcloud's second question, what do you personally believe needs to be done to get to the pleroma? Are there rituals which allow a person to return to it, or the gnosis and faith a person gains? I'm gonna let I'm gonna let ladies start
Oh,
that one again
thank
too.
you.
Lady, I'll start at the next one. I promise.
I think that I think there's a question at this point, is what is you
Yeah.
at this point? If you think that you are going to have the same identity, consciousness of your identity once you achieve that level, or once you actually strip yourself of the trappings that make you you, so that you can return. I'm not so sure that you're going to have that the consciousness or what returns to the pleroma is going to be anything that you would recognize as you returning to that. Um, I'm not sure how useful a goal that is, if you're doing it from the perspective of, what do I need to do to reach this? Because what is I may become very different from who you are now. So I would say that. As far as rituals, I mean, there are a lot of people very who find that ritual is incredibly important. We may get into this later on in some of our other questions, that a ritual practice, rituals and a ritual practice, and I'm once in a while ritual, those can be interesting and positive and good, but I think it does not substitute for daily practice. That sort of thing can be, in and of itself, a resistance to your context and your circumstances. And that act, perpetual act of resistance, I think is very powerful for Gnostics because we are acknowledging the weight of what is bearing down upon us, that prison, that black iron prison, while also simultaneously not submitting to it but resisting it. And daily ritual, daily practice, I think, is a very key way in doing that. Now, what that those rituals and practices are, I think, can vary from person to person, not only in terms of what their current personality is, but also their context, their current situation, and the point in history in which they are enfleshed and are operating. So, while for many people this may be very religious. For others, that may not be what's going on at all. You might be doing entirely different work or entirely different practices. Your practices may be meditation, they may be perpetual acts of service, that it could be meditative reading. There's a bunch of different things that you could do, but I would say that it's the daily practice of a ritual acts as a form of resistance to a sloppy and changing and often oppressive world, and that is very key to your development.
Yeah, 100%. And I don't know how many more times I'm going to say 100%. We're supposed to be giving different perspectives, but I'm just going to nod
Different.
and say spot on. um, and again, just a few additions. You know, in the question, it says, are there rituals, or is it gnosis and faith a person gains? And it's not an either or. And I think
Mhm.
there is a number of ways to reach a pleroma. I believe as well. And I'm not quite sure what I can't see, of course, into. I can't do any follow up questions with the questioner. But for the Gnostics, a lot of them did what they call ascent practices. Okay,
Mhm.
where they're actually taking some mythology about what happens after you die and your soul ascends, and you're doing it while you're
You're
alive.
alive. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is very important. Even if you don't, even if enlightenment isn't what you think it is, or there's no such thing as enlightenment, or we can't fully join with the pleroma, the pleroma is outside of time, right? So you don't necessarily return to it while you're dead. You can have this pleromic experience, and you should be trying to have this pleromic experience, I believe, while you're alive. Um, and again, after death, and actually during a mystical experience as well, what is that you, just like Bishop Laney was saying, you may not recognize it. And if you ever have had a mystical experience, those people out there, what's sometimes called the oceanic experience, there's not much of a you
Right.
during that experience. um okay, so
There is one thing I would like to say also,
please.
and you kind of touched on this as well. The idea of gnosis versus practice. Back in the 90s, I got on the internet probably in 93.
Wow.
And what was happening at that time was there were various individuals who were part of these occult lodges and groups that were putting copies of all the rituals and the writings on the internet for anybody to see. And some people were pulling their hair out, and people were downloading them and thinking, okay, I'm going to find this great key to the universe. And they found this material, which was, shall we say, either impenetrable or just plain dull.
Yeah.
And they're saying, well, there's no great mysteries here, phooey, and walked off. And I think that what people don't realize is that unless if you're part of an esoteric school and you're actually working with the teachings but practicing and working with others and have a relationship to teachers who have been in the tradition, the mysteries are not what's on paper or even necessarily what's been spoken. The mysteries are revealed the more you work.
Yeah.
Suddenly, all the literature that seemed so flat or uninteresting, suddenly you understand it. That it takes on entirely different meaning when you have been working within that system.
Yeah.
So,
100%. I mean, 1000%. I was recently reading some writings by Bishop Alan Greenfield, where he was talking about some details around some esoteric Masonic rituals,
Yeah.
and he sort of had a postscript where he said, some people might think I'm revealing secrets here, but number one, I'm only referring to rituals which have been in the public domain now for more than 100 years, because there have been a number of esoteric Masonic rituals revealed even before the internet. And number two, it doesn't matter if I revealed all of them, because it's not about what's on the paper. You
Yeah.
have to go through them, you have to live them, you have to work them. So, and that's where the quote unquote secret is, and that's where the quote unquote secret is revealed to yourself.
Bishop Greenfield is old school. I mean, he knows he's been doing this stuff, for a very long time, and he's absolutely, yeah, that's absolutely right.
Yeah. Okay, next question from Lux01. Given the speculative and somewhat fluid nature of Gnosticism, despite common denominators, do you think there are strains of Gnosticism that are actually incompatible with each other? So I'll start in on this one. Uh, Long-time listeners and watchers of Talk Gnosis know that we have a really common answer, which is yes and no. So to that, I would say yes and no. Uh, Going back to the ancient Gnostics, we sometimes look back on our spiritual ancestors, and sometimes under the influence of not very good history and New Age ideas, we want people who lived 2,000 years ago to be, very open and accepting and modern and progressive, okay? And in some ways, particularly compared to the rest of their culture, the Gnostics were. But they at the same time, they were people of their time, and there's different schools of Gnosticism. Okay, some of the heresiologists do say that the different schools of Gnosticism were fine with each other and fine with whatever came along. Something that really drove the heresiologists crazy is that they said the Gnostics would go to the pagan rituals and that they would go study with Greek philosophers. And of course, later on, we have Greek philosophers from the Neoplatonic schools complaining about these Gnostics coming in and studying with them and all their bad ideas. And they would go to the mystery cults, the pagan mystery cults. So we do have some records of the, even though they're in different schools of Gnosticism, of them sort of intermingling, getting along, perhaps having some progressive ideas about there's many ways to the truth. Okay. At the same time, there's definitely schools of Gnosticism in the ancient world that believed that they had the way, that they were the only ones that were going to get back to the Pleroma. Particularly, some of the Cephian writings seems to indicate that they really thought that their strain of Gnosticism was the right one and the right religion and the right proper way to commune with the real God. Later on, there's a famous Gnostic text. It's very long and boring, but it was one of the first discovered, called the Pistis Sophia. There is some great stuff in there. I do recommend getting a more modern translation that sort of pares down some of the repetitive stuff. It's from a late Gnostic group, and it's a real sort of mishmash of the groups that came before them. But there is some stuff in the Pistis Sophia where they seem to be talking about the other Gnostic groups and that about all the things that they got wrong. So we do have this. So yes and no, right? Um, Even back then, we have some Gnostics saying that's incompatible. Now, if you're going to sort of break it down from the outside as an anthropologist, if you're going to look at Manichaeanism or Catharism and mystical Christianity and Cephianism, well, yeah, like these systems do have different myths and some different structures, and if you try to live by them strictly, interpret them quote unquote literally, they would be incompatible with each other. But what I'm going to say to that is modern Gnostics are eclectic. Okay. And we draw from a number of ancient schools and a number of modern schools. And this, when I explain it that way, sounds like we get to have our cake and eat it too. But this is how many religions work. If you read the Bible carefully, many of the books of the Bible actually come from different schools of Judaism and Christianity, and are actually, if you really wanted to break it down and be strict about it, aren't compatible with each other. When you look at the Gospels, the Gospel of Mark has a very different idea about who Jesus is and if he's God and why he died than the Gospel of John does. But for the last 2,000 years, Christianity has been able to make this work. Um, So I would say get a little postmodern about it. You don't necessarily have to construct your own faith. You can get guidance from these ancient traditions and these tracks. But as a modern person, you can put that square peg through a round hole.
Yeah.
Bishop Laney, anything on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good question.
Yeah,
I
it's
I would
great.
say that one thing to keep in mind is that modern Gnosticism is called that for a reason. That that ancient Gnosticism is these traditions, these churches, they died out,
Yeah,
and there has been a resurrection of sorts due to the discovery of the Nagamati works and the scholarship and that sort of thing. But this is not a continuing tradition,
yeah,
and so it's perfectly it's required. It is in fact required. It's not just acceptable, it's also required for people now to sift through the mountain of information that we now have that probably may not have been even accessible even to Gnostic contemporaries or people who came right after each other because they didn't have a printing press. And there it's very possible for people now to sift through this, find the threads that make sense, and to work along those lines and develop those lines.
yeah,
When we look at Philip K. Dick, for example, who I believe is a Gnostic prophet. I mean, his the Valis trilogy. I don't know how recognizable it would have been to an ancient Gnostic, but it sure has spoken to a lot of modern Gnostics.
yeah, yeah,
And this was absolutely necessary. It was absolutely necessary. Now, there are, of course, Gnostic churches, modern Gnostic churches and traditions that do have a more of a continuing strain going from French occultism and various Masonic and Martinist traditions. That certainly is there. And they've worked in other kinds of mythos into their work, the Grail mythos, and that's fine. But there are also people who have stepped outside of that and are doing entirely different things.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Okay, well, next question is from Sun 2027. Definitely one I'm going to have Lainey start on as she's a bishop. And the question is, what do you suggest for people who might not share your views on the Apostolic Church, the sacraments, the vestments, and what might seem like quote unquote trappings of Orthodox and Catholic ecclesiology?
Yeah, I think that that's perfectly reasonable. And I know people who identify as Gnostic who want nothing to do with the apostolic tradition. And I think that that is absolutely, as Deacon Jonathan would say, 100% legit. Because I absolutely can say somebody's saying, why are you just holding on to the trappings of the established church, which in many cases came to represent and be the, I hate to say it, but client states of empire.
Yeah.
And it's perfectly legitimate to have to ask that question
And it
without
could be
wanting.
triggering too, right? If you grew up in that environment, right? If you did come from a not very welcoming high church tradition.
It could possibly be triggering. I'm going to reserve my opinions on that, but I think that I would say that it's understandable that a person may not be able to identify with it. There's a lot. I mean, I grew up Protestant, and there's a lot that I just don't comprehend from my fellow clergy who grew up in the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
There are things that I just cannot, that just go vroom right over my head. I just don't quite get it. But if a person, identifies as a Gnostic or is inspired by this, I see no particular reason why you have to try to fit yourself into a mold that doesn't suit you. There are options available to you. And again, we've talked about this. There are other practices. You can do practices in your own home. Meditation can be excellent if you are interested in prayers. June Singer's Book of Hours, by the way, I think is an excellent Book of Hours that follows the traditional hours, but it is not in any way a high church.
Yeah.
So I think it's a beautiful, beautiful ritual that somebody could enter into. There's also the option of seeking out other communities. One thing that you might want to consider is a Unitarian Universalist church,
Mm,
because they tend to be open to a wide variety of spiritual practices and histories, but they are not sacramental
yeah.
at all. So that would be potentially an option. Or if you don't mind a little bit of low church, you could go to a low church, Episcopal Church or United Church of Christ, perhaps United Church of Canada, or that sort of thing, which is definitely in the Congregationalist tradition. Other options might be to do things like the Gurdjieff work,
Hmm.
which I have been involved with on and off over the years. And the Gurdjieff work is not ecclesial. It's very, in my opinion, there's a lot of, it's not entirely Gnostic, but there's a lot of resemblances there. It kind of rhymes. And, but there, it does not have a priesthood. It does not have sacraments. It has practices, and there is a definite community aspect to it, but it is not ecclesiastical. It's not a church. So that those might be some other options
Yeah.
um, for you.
Yeah. What I'll add to that too is this is probably possibly a hypothetical question from Sun 2027, but perhaps it's not. If speaking personally from myself, someone who's a deacon in a apostolic church, if someone here in Montreal came to me and said, I want to be involved with your group, or I want to be involved with Gnosticism, but I don't really like this high churchy stuff. Well, when we're not under quarantine, I try to do two activities a month.
Hmm.
One of them is I've been able to do Mass for a year, the liturgy of the pre-sanctified gifts, and then the other night is something that's less churchy. So we do a discussion night, or meditation and discussion, or a meal, and I know not only clergy in my own church, but other esoteric churches, they do similar things: movie nights, beer of a bishop, coffee. So you may not be able to fully join in to the life of the church if sacraments aren't your bag, but there's a good chance. And I can't, of course, speak for for every member of the clergy all around the world. But if there was a sacramental Gnostic church close to you, and you wanted a Gnostic community, but you can't deal with the churchy stuff, it might be worth it to drop them a line. There's probably some activities that they would love to see you at.
And I've never encountered a Gnostic church that would in any way shame somebody for not receiving the sacrament.
Yeah,
First of all, my approach whenever I've had public services is, everybody is invited to receive the Eucharist. Those who do not want to receive it can come up and request a blessing,
yeah,
or they can just sit on their butts
yeah,
and wait for everybody to finish. But they may enjoy coming to the talk afterwards. They may enjoy the preaching.
yeah,
They may enjoy the readings. Um, so that's an option as well. And I usually my experience with Gnostic churches is that they're so small, the clergy are just happy to have somebody show up.
yeah,
And if you
yeah.
want to, yeah, and if you even want to say ahead of time, to the clergy person, look, I'm not comfortable taking the sacrament, but I would like to sit in. I Anybody who would give you a hard time about that, that's a red flag. Get out of there.
Exactly. Okay, so next question, which again I'm going to have Lainey start with, because she has a strong interest and background in disaster preparedness, being prepared. Um, so the question is from it's a me Trump, and the question is, how do you see the current global situation from a Gnostic perspective? What's the best way to go forward amidst increasing pressure from all sides: economic, freedom, spiritual, etc.?
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever used this example on this show before. From my perspective as an American, and Deacon here is from Canada, but from my perspective as an American, this current crisis, this pandemic, is like a black light being shown on a sleazy motel room.
Mm.
We're seeing just this evidence of just the utter decay and the terrible things that have been happening, and we're seeing just the fault lines of a country that is streamlined for profit, for monetary gain, and we're seeing that right now. There are other countries where this is different, what they're seeing right now, what they're coping with. But as an American, I'm going to speak from the American perspective on this. Um, so for me, we think about the demiurge. I think many people do think of the demiurge as perhaps the god we got indoctrinated in with, who this sky daddy who punishes you until you're good, and when you are good, then maybe the punishment will start, unless he decides to torment you again, because that's what he wants to do. That's kind of a Calvinist perspective that a lot of people have grown up with.
Yeah.
Love me or I'm going to hurt you.
Yeah.
And that's a very destructive way of thinking about the divine. And I think it has a nasty impact on just about everybody's life at this point. So what I'm seeing here is, um, the system is being exposed. All this entire system is being exposed, as we are attempting to fight something that even the most brilliant minds, even people with a lot of money, can't really fight right now, and we're being forced just to look at everything the way from a very different vantage point, a vantage point of somebody who is actually, who is being oppressed. A lot of people and oppressed people's groups are coming forward now and saying, hey, you guys are finally starting to get it,
Yeah.
that these systems do not work for everybody, and we've been trying to deal with this for generations, and now you're finally seeing that none of this is working for you either. And I think that for many people, this is a time of spiritual reckoning, and being able to see just what we're laboring, identify what we're laboring under, instead of feeling like, we can just coast. We can't just coast. Everything that we're doing now, everything that we touch, is suddenly suspect, and it's forcing us to reckon with a world that is not safe, that we've created in developed countries, for those of us, in my case, who are white and supremely middle class. We've got this bubble that we've been living in, and now it has been burst. And so from my perspective, we have an opportunity to see things far more as they are, rather than what we have chosen to believe as a defense mechanism to get through our days, because our days have been messed up right now. So I don't know if that answers that question, but I think that this has been a time of real reckoning and revelation. As for moving forward, that's an interesting question, because this is changing every day. I do some volunteer work around this issue, and one thing I keep telling people is, novel coronavirus, it's new. It's a new virus, and the doctors are learning how it works. People are not even aware how it works at this point. So there is no long-term strategy that's available right now, because we don't know what that's going to look like. We have business models that have just collapsed. For example, if you are in if you're in food or beverage retail, you know that the key to getting people to buy is sampling, having wine tastings, having, cheese tastings, having the sample people at the store passing samples out. That's gone. So your ability to sell your gourmet or even your non-gourmet foods and beverages, you've just lost that. And now you're going to have to figure out an entire way to market your goods that you've invested a lot of money in. And then this goes down to stores as well as suppliers. The beauty industry, once again, high-end beauty stores, you go in and you have a makeover in the store, they match your foundation, they've got everything out there on a pallet for you to try out. That's completely gone. What's going to happen with returns? Nobody's going to want to buy something that might have been returned to a store, because they're afraid of touching it. The used clothing market had just seen incredible growth. There was one company out there, that used clothing company, that got so successful it was starting to put its merchandise in established retailers like Macy's. That's gone because nobody wants to buy used stuff. So we're seeing just here huge swaths of industry and business that are going out the window, in addition to how our daily routines have been affected. So the way to go forward right now is the ability to align and adapt with changes while at the same time resisting despair or ignorance and just trying to go on business as usual. And again, I've mentioned this earlier. I think that's one of the things that daily rituals and practices can do for people. There's also the issue of community. And normally I would say this is a time for communities together to get together. Well, we can't. We can't even visit our friends. We can't touch our own grandchildren. So again, that's going to require a different alignment. Everything that we've been able to use to soothe ourselves in things like this are now gone from us. And this is going to require, I think, a daily, give us this day our daily bread. We're going to take in our nourishment daily because we don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. So, kind of a sermon there. I apologize, but
No,
that's
that
where I'm at with this.
exactly. Well, what I'll add to that is just building on what Bishop Laney said. How do we see the current global situation from a Gnostic perspective? Well, I'm a pretty dualist Gnostic. This place always was samsara. It always was a prison. It always was the Kali Yuga. So the Gnostic shouldn't be surprised. And also, like what Laney was saying, is that the chances are a lot of people watching and listening might have a middle class background, right? Which I have a solid middle class background. I'm very white, I'm very cis, I'm very male. But at any point in the world before this pandemic, at any time, no matter how things are going well in my country, for me, there's always people without clean drinking water. There's always parasites eating children's eyes. There's always some sort of mini Holocaust happening. There's always racism and hate, right? So just like Laney was saying, this is sort of an unveiling where we get to see what the world is like. At the same time, there's a lot of beauty in this world. Divinity is trapped within the world, but that means divinity is here.
Mhm.
So, what's the best way to go forward? Well, it is acting from a place of love. Um, um, Connecting to people as much as possible. That might be over Zoom, might be over Facebook with the present situation. And I don't want to be misinterpreted, but not giving in to despair,
Mhm.
which is different from not like don't not get sad,
Right,
don't
right.
not get depressed. Okay, um, there's going to be a lot of people watching and listening who are going to have some depression, sadness, and anxiety, and it's important to feel what you feel, to not deny it, and to be nice to yourself, because with this background of all these horrible things happening, it's really hard to be at optimal condition. Okay, so it is all right to feel bad right now, and if you do feel bad, it's okay. That's different from giving in to despair.
Right.
Despair is something completely different. Okay, you can be a realistic optimist, right? You can keep hope alive. So that's the only thing I'll say about going forward. And of course, like Lady was saying, a daily practice, connecting to people that you love, maybe thinking about what a new world can be, because there is going to be a reshaping when we come out of this, and perhaps you can participate in this reshaping. And if I keep talking, I don't like to get too political on the show. I will start getting too political. So you can private message me for how I think we should move forward on the economic and freedom front. So I'll move into the next question, which is from a dead panda. And I'll jump into the answer for this one. The question is, I would love to hear about the difference between soul and spirit. So in a lot of the classical Gnostic systems, as well as many ancient peoples around the Mediterranean and Greece, and the whole sort of background of the West, divide humans into three parts. Okay, this is actually something the Gnostics inherited, as far as I know, and it's usually body, soul, and spirit. Body is more than our physical body. It's when they say body, they do mean our physical body, but they also mean kind of animal instincts. Okay, so the hunger would come from the body self, right? Lust, even though these would have some soul reflections as well. But so that's the body. I think people understand that right away. The animal side of us, to put it in more recent evolutionary terms. Okay, spirit is the divine spark, the the piece of the pleroma, the piece of the divine that's trapped here on earth. So this is what gets a little confusing. And then soul is sort of the layer that is on top of spirit. And probably a lot of the ancient Gnostics didn't love soul. It's in other parlances or modern parlances, it's more like the false self, what we would call the ego, the non-permanent self, the non-real self, the layer that is on top of spirit that we think is us, that we over-identify with, but isn't actually us. So yeah, I hope that that clarifies the difference between soul and spirit. Bishop Laney, do you have more to say about that?
Yeah, yeah, it's one of those issues that I've read about over the years, and I've never been entirely satisfied. Now, I will say in the Gurdjieffian tradition, there's a very different approach, which is that people do not really have souls. You're not really born with a soul. There's something very rudimentary there that has to be built over time, and it's the soul which can possibly that can possibly survive your physical death. And it's by developing that soul through various types of various exercises, various types of resistance and friction, that you can develop a soul which may be something that can outlive your body at some point, and possibly be reincarnated, or move on to a higher plane. But that's its own special teaching. um, that's something I think I'm closer to that personally, because that's kind of sort of my tradition. I'm not entirely satisfied with the idea that the soul is either this thing that that makes you human, um, and that's what's gets saved through your religious belief or devotion, or with the idea that your soulishness is kind of a lower self. I've heard those explanations, and I'm not entirely satisfied with them. So I tend to come at this from a different perspective than I would say many Gnostics, certainly in the Apostolic uh, tradition, do.
Perfect. Okay, so next question, and I'll dive into this one as well because I think it's a relatively easy one, but perhaps that is a foolish thing to say. um, referring to some of the Gnostic mythologies, this is from Cool KHR. How could Yaldabaoth, a lion and a serpent, create the earth when he did not know of such things yet? Well, in a lot of the Gnostic myths, the Yaldabaoth, which is sort of the fake lower god who is cut off from the fullness, cut off from the rest of divinity, cut off from the universe, actually pushed into out into an outer darkness or into a dark corner of the universe. Um, Yaldabaoth is able to create because he gets a glimpse of the real world. So he makes a bad copy of it. So they're taking an idea from Plato, where there in the fullness, there is archetypes where everything is perfect and the world is a copy of it. Okay, and the Gnostics sort of take that to an extreme where it's a bad copy. And the other payoff only gets a little glimpse of it, and then he actually later denies it because then he gets a glimpse of it, he makes the world, then he shakes his head and said, I made this, I came up with this, nobody else did. I'm the only god. There's no other god besides me. So that's how Yaldabaoth was able to do that, even though he didn't know of such things. He got that little glimpse, made a bad copy. Bishop, do you have anything on that?
Yeah, I love your explanation, but I'm also loving the question because, how did he create the earth when he did not know of such things yet? And I think it kind of answers it. He didn't know.
Yeah,
He didn't know. He had a glimpse. Well, we can get a glimpse at a lot of things, and we can try and imitate. But if we don't really know it, that our imitation, or what we're trying to create from getting a glimpse but no real knowledge, really is not going to be real.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's actually we made it through all the
We
questions.
did.
Yeah, which is very impressive. So thank you everybody who submitted those questions. We're at the 50-minute mark, which is close to the end of the show for us. But before we wrap up, I'm going to connect to the higher genius, to the unknown superior, to the secret chief, to the hidden master, to the guru himself, our producer Father Tony. Father Tony, is there any questions or interesting comments from the patrons chat?
There are not. The patrons are watching, but they seem to be satisfied with the content so far.
Okay, wonderful. Well, we're just so brilliant, and we just explain so much that they don't feel the need to add. So I guess I will move into wrapping up then. So that this has been a lot of fun. We will do this again. So please send in your questions on whatever platform you want. A lot of these came from Reddit, but I also made a request on Twitter and on Facebook. But email, Patreon, wherever you want us to send us questions, send them in. We'll do our best to answer them. And again, I know I opened the show with talk about the Patreon. I know these are particularly hard times. If you can spare a dollar, that would be amazing. If you can't, you can really help us out by telling people about the show, by sharing the show. That would be fantastic. Commenting, subscribing on YouTube, subscribing to the podcast version on the podcast of your choice. So I guess I'm signing off. This is Jonathan Stewart saying good night.
Good night.
Bye.